Welcome to Freedom Window. I'm going to talk about Florida, but before I do, I want to ask you to like this video if you enjoy it, share the video with a family or friend, and if you think the channel gives good content, please subscribe to the channel. All right, let's talk about Florida. Let's look at the Target Smart data. What we have here is something very few people, actually really nobody expected. The Republicans are keeping pace with the Democrats in terms of the early mail-in and early in-person vote. Now, the Democrats are saying, hey, you know what? We don't care because you must be cannibalizing your Election Day vote. That's the whole question. Are the Republicans going to have enough vote left on Election Day to actually win Election Day? That's the question. Fortunately for us, this is a very easy question. So let's go to the model. My model offers a very clear answer to this question, and you'll see here shortly what that is. Now, the blue numbers here tell a very interesting tale. 59% of the eligible vote has already voted in Florida for the Republicans. 60% of the eligible vote has already voted in Florida for the Democrats. My total estimate was that 59.6% of Florida Republicans would vote early. The total estimate for Democrats is that 72.2% would vote early. So, the Democrats are not meeting their margin, their expectations based on the polls. Now, we expected 29% of Florida voters would vote early by mail, based on the polls. On the polls, we assumed that 45% of Democrats would vote early by mail. The difference between this number and this number represents how many we expected to vote early in person. Same with the Democrats. Now, we determined an early ballot ratio based on how many ballots were requested. Why? What is the thinking there? It's just like a pollster. A pollster asks you, are you thinking about the election? Or they'll ask you specific questions, and if you get the answers right, then they're going to say, okay, this is a likely voter because they've thought about it. In the same way, if you request a ballot, we're assuming you're thinking about the election. Therefore, it's one of the clearest ways to indicate that you're a likely voter. Now, you may not necessarily vote by early mail ballot, but you're going to most likely vote in some way. And the percentage of early mail voters who are actually intending to, thinking about voting, you can apply that to other segments of the vote. People who are going to vote early in person and people who are going to vote on Election Day. That percentage applies across the party each segment of the vote as an indicator of how excited that party is to vote. So, the reason the Republicans are at 1.29 is because they requested more ballots than the polls predicted they would. Democrats are at 1.15. They are a little behind the Republicans only because they just didn't request as many as the polls thought they would. Same with independents. So what we're seeing here is an actual manifestation of a lack of interest, of less interest in voting. That's why the Democrats are underperforming what the polls expect. Now, why would we expect this to change on Election Day? We shouldn't. Election Day calculations in my spreadsheet take into account the early vote. They take into account the fact that Republicans are more enthused in voting. So the total number available for Republicans to vote is 2 million. The total number for Democrats is 1.44 million. Based on the performance in the early vote, we estimate that 1.6 million Republicans will show up and vote, and 930,000 Democrats will show up and vote. We go down to see the actual results. In one model, Republicans outnumber Democrats by 550,000. In another model, they outnumber Democrats by around 700,000. So it's a lot. So let's test the proposition. Are Republicans consuming their Election Day vote? Well, let's change this number, this expectation based on good polling, of how many Republicans we expected to come out and vote. Let's change that to 32. Okay, that raised this number because it's a combination. The spreadsheet, the model is comprehensive. It all works together. That brought the early ballot ratio down to 1.17, down around where the Democrats are. So this is kind of this. If the Republicans are consuming their election day vote, this is what we would expect to see. We would expect to see that the interest won't actually apply on election day. We can't apply it across the different segments of the electorate, and they're consuming their vote. There's a set number that's going to vote, and that's that. So it affects the election day total as well here. And we go down to the total final estimate. Republicans would still outnumber Democrats by 270,000 or so in one model. In another model, they would outnumber them by a little over 200,000. What do you have to do to get a Democratic win in this scenario? Well, you've got to bring the Republicans up to about 64% of the total Republicans are voting early. In this scenario, what do we have? Final result, Republicans are still leading. They're leading here by over 120,000. Here in this model, they're actually behind the Democrats. So we've now constructed a scenario whereby the Republicans are going to be trailing the Democrats. But it is an unrealistic scenario because it brings the request early ballot ratio below the Democrats. Why would we assume that? We shouldn't assume that. It doesn't square with the facts. More Republicans as a percentage of what was expected requested ballots than Democrats. It's very likely that that increased interest will spread across to election day as well. And for that reason, we should put this back where we had it at 29, because a 1.29 early ballot ratio is not unreasonable. Why do I say this? Okay, 29% of the electorate is estimated by the polls to vote early. Let's do a little bit of math. So we look at the total registered voters in Florida. You've got a little over 5 million. And then we have the total actually voted by mail in Florida, right here, Republicans, 1.359 million. All right, let's do a little bit of math here. Okay, I've completed the calculation. This is 27% of the total registered vote. The estimated was 29%. Now you might say, but hey, that's assuming 100% voter turnout. Fair enough. That's why it's reasonable to raise this number to, say, 31. It's not reasonable to raise it to 35 or 33. What we do is, when we raise that number just a little bit, we're almost to the end of the early vote period. We still find Republicans outnumbering Democrats by close to 300,000 in this model and close to 400,000 in that model. So, yes, the Republicans are cannibalizing a little bit of their election day vote, but not nearly enough to make the difference. As long as the Republicans get out and actually vote on election day, like they've been saying they're going to, Trump should win Florida fairly comfortably. It won't be a blowout. It'll be a few points. But Trump should win Florida by several points. If you like the video, please like, share the video, and please subscribe to the channel.